Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights shall come to order on March 22nd, 2022 at 11:02 a.m. My name is Cindy Bies, and I am currently serving as the Vice Chair of the Illinois Advisory Committee. Before we begin today's meeting, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge Women's History Month. This is an annual celebration of the many trailblazing women who have helped our society be more inclusive of all persons regardless of gender. In the words of a former commission chair, Martin Castro, from Sacagawea to Susan B. Anthony, to Rosa Parks, to Dolores, we are in today. Throughout this nation's history, women and girls have made vital contributions despite discrimination and hardship. Courageous women marched for and won the right to vote. Then another generation participated in the civil rights movement to ensure that right was extended to all persons regardless of color. Honor the accomplishments and the vision of these extraordinary women who have improved civil rights for all. Now, I would like to ask Liliana Schiller, our support specialist at the Commission, to assist with roll call. Committee members, if you're joining by phone, please press *6 to unmute yourself and then *6 again to place yourself back on mute when I call on you during the Q&A. Liliana, go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ryan Dunnigan. Jonathan Bean.
Here.
Joanna Botchevich-Boroviec is excused. Cindy Bies.
Here.
Mark Callaghan. I do see that Mark is on the line, so I just sent, oh, go ahead. I see that you're unmuted, but we're unable to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can. Thank you so much for joining us. Trevor Copeland. Tabassum Halim. Rayad Kazmi. Matthew Paprocki is excused. And Gregory Sanford.
Present.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liliana. Also present with us today is Ana Victoria Fortes, who is our designated federal official. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is an independent, bipartisan agency of the federal government charged with studying discrimination or denial of equal protection of the law because of race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, or national origin, or in the administration of justice. In each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the 5 U.S. territories, an advisory committee to the Commission has been established. They are made up of bipartisan persons who serve without compensation to advise the Commission on relevant information concerning their respective state or territory. Today is the second in a series of 3 web hearings examining access to post-secondary education. We're taking a broad look at this topic, and we hope this meeting will help inform us of various factors and subtopics to examine further. We are particularly interested in barriers to access that may disproportionately affect a person based on the personal characteristics listed in the Commission's authorizing statute. Based on information collected through this testimony, the committee will draft a report that will include its findings and recommendations, and that report will be shared with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. The Commission will then forward those recommendations to the appropriate federal and state entities. Closed captions are provided for today's meeting. To access the captions, please click on the 3 dots located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Then click Multimedia Viewer. In addition, please note that this meeting is being recorded for the public record, and the web hearing recording will be available on our public database. You can contact Ana Fortes at afortes@usccr.gov if you wish to obtain those records. Today, we will hear from several speakers. Presenters, we do ask you to stay within about a 12 to 15 minute time frame for your speaking time and reserve additional talking points for the question and answer session if you are not able to address all your points within that time frame. Anna or Liliana will send you a message through the chat box to let you know when you are near the end of your speaking time. After the presentations, the committee will ask questions of the panelists, and then we will go into public comment. Please note that the question and answer session is reserved for committee members only. We invite members of the public to use the chat box located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen to let us know if you would like to make a comment or share your perspective on the topic. With that said, I think we're ready to begin today's meetings. Our first speaker today is Rabbi Shlomo Soroka, Director of Government Affairs, Agudath, Israel of Illinois. So, Rabbi, I'd like to begin to invite you to begin anytime you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's an honor, and honored commission members. Thank you for having me today. I'd like to talk about some barriers that a community that sometimes is overlooked when it comes to civil rights. With the two areas that I want to address, one area in particular, I think there's just a lack of awareness that I want to share with you today. But just, a little background, for thousands of years, Jews have been persecuted, discriminated against in virtually every country we have ever lived in. I would tell you that all four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and my great-grandparents suffered from the pogroms that ravaged Jewish communities throughout the Russian Empire. The anti-Semitic intolerance and discrimination that is part of the American Jewish experience is a far cry from the subjugations, expulsions, and genocides that were perpetrated against us in other countries throughout the millennia. Still, there were real obstacles and barriers that we Jews faced in the United States, including in the domain of higher education. It wasn't that long ago that many universities would not admit Jews, or more commonly had quotas limiting the number of Jewish students. The intent, in part, was to close off the primary pathway for Jewish upward mobility and success. I personally know many Jewish families with non-Jewish surnames because a father or a grandfather changed their name in order to gain acceptance into undergrad school or an undergraduate program, law school, medical school. It's really something that is quite common. But we've come a long way since then. And it's rare today that we are denied access to educational opportunities on the basis of our religion alone. My father's a tenured college professor, and I have friends and family that have graduated from the top schools in the country. However, despite the progress we've made, there still remains much work to be done. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Orthodox Jews reach out to our organization every year regarding the challenges they face with regard to religious accommodations in the workplace and in school. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, federal law requires employers to make reasonable accommodations for an employee who sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance conflicts with a work requirement, unless doing so would pose what's called undue hardship. In post-secondary education, we are fortunate in Illinois to have what's called the University Religious Observances Act, which was passed in 1995, and it was amended with enhancements in 2012 under Governor Quinn, that requires public institutions of higher education to make reasonable accommodations for students, which is very similar to the accommodations that are required of employers under Title VII. The law addresses issues related to admissions, class attendance, assignments, the scheduling of exams, and even provides students with a procedure to redress grievances. Still, there are a few areas where major gaps continue to exist. One is with private institutions of higher education. The University Religious Observances Act is limited to public universities, and rightfully so. It has very broad language, and it could possibly infringe upon the freedoms of a religious institution to maintain its character and integrity. But we believe it is possible to pass legislation that is more narrow in scope by specifically addressing the issue of taking exams and attendance when in conflict with religious observance. I'm familiar with a case of, there was a nursing student in New Jersey that was forced to choose between flunking an entire semester or attending class on Yom Kippur, which, for those of you who don't know, is the holiest day of the year in Judaism. And as a result of that situation, legislation was introduced and passed in the state of New Jersey, requiring all institutions of higher education, including private institutions, to provide alternative accommodations when there's a religious conflict. So that's one area. There's also a gap in the realm that exists between what's really classified as schooling and employment. There are many fields that, in order to become a licensed professional, one is required to put in many hours of clinical or practical experience. And the calls we get the most from, by far, are nursing students. They have requirements to participate in clinicals, or what's called sometimes practica, which is structured college supervised learning experiences in the field of nursing. Shifts and assignments are often in conflict with religious restrictions in the Jewish Sabbath or holiday observance. Practica is not necessarily classified technically or legally a school assignment, but neither does it fall under Title VII and other laws that govern employment. And with expanding cultural diversity, I think we need to increase the diversity of the nursing workforce to address the cultural sensitivities of all communities. Even when instructors are required to accommodate, they often aren't aware of the law. And sometimes, even if they're aware, they can make it difficult for students, and I've seen that many times. It's often simply a lack of knowledge or a misconception that the observance of certain holidays means that it's prohibited to attend classes, do assignments, take exams, use electronics and technology, and to travel by any means other than walking. They think that a holiday means a vacation. That's not what a Jewish holiday is. The calls we get, like I said before, most often are from nursing school students. This can be attributed to a number of different factors. The first, as I explained, attending clinicals are mandatory and they are more difficult to reschedule. And practica may be like a gray area, which is not really technically school, but also not employment. Secondly, most large college campuses have a chaplain or a clergy person that can intervene on behalf of a student. That often resolves the issue. But many nursing school programs operate in off-campus satellite locations where there's no accessible clergy member. Thirdly, it happens to be a popular career choice among many observant Jews. So in summary, while we have made tremendous strides in removing barriers in post-secondary education for Orthodox Jews, we still face real hurdles when dealing with religious observance and schooling requirements. These conflicts are not adequately addressed by the current law, both federal and even state law here in Illinois, as it applies to only public universities, and may not cover all the requirements needed for licensure. To properly address the issue, a combination of legislation and educating the educational establishment could greatly improve the situation. I want to just briefly touch on another area of significant challenge that Jews face while attending college that I won't delve into deeply, but I would be remiss not to mention at all. Anti-Semitism, probably the oldest form of bigotry and hate, is rising globally, nationally, and locally. It's often cloaked under the guise of anti-Israel or anti-Zionist activism, but it's really nothing short of blatant anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, it's a growing and rampant problem on college campuses throughout the entire country, including Illinois. Jewish students are often harassed and made to feel unsafe. At University of Illinois or Urbana-Champaign, there have been really too many incidents to count. And in 2020, students filed a Title VI civil rights complaint with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. The university has been working with Jewish groups to address the scourge of hate on campus, but anti-Semitic incidents continue to occur there even as recently as last month. Students report that anti-Semitic bigotry is commonly tolerated by school faculty even. Colleges really need to work towards making religious life on campus accommodating and welcoming by having a zero tolerance policy for any form of bigotry, and by inviting and supporting Jewish outreach organizations to enable Jewish students to feel at home when they're away from home. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that testimony. I understand that we're actually going to take some questions from our committee members at this point. So committee members, I'm going to go in reverse alphabetical order and ask each of you if you have a question for the rabbi. So that would mean I would begin with Gregory Sanford. Do you have any questions for Rabbi Soroka?
I do, Rabbi. Thank you very much for sharing. I know that at the outset you mentioned that the Civil Rights Act typically requires employers to make reasonable accommodations for an employee, and in the educational context, from your perspective, is that satisfactory? Is that what you would be looking for? And it's simply a question of the breadth in which that reasonable accommodation needs to be made. Is that what I understood you to be saying?
Yes, that's correct. We're not looking for an unreasonable accommodation. We're looking for a reasonable accommodation. And we understand that there are times where an accommodation does, in fact, result in undue hardship to others. And while we want to live our lives as observant Jews the way we have lived for thousands of years, we don't want to impose on others. And if it's going to come at the cost of imposing on others, then we have to make sacrifices. And that means sometimes we'll have to lose out. But when a reasonable accommodation can be made and it does not result in undue hardship, that is where we are looking for some wiggle room and for those that that really value civil rights to try to find an accommodation that works for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask Tabassum Halim if she has a question for you now.
Yes, thank you. Again, I want to thank Soroka for bringing this topic into the conversation. It's so important when many of the students may be coming from different faiths other than the dominant culture, and people may not know about the special holidays and what that requires. So that's really important. My question to you is, has there been any coordination to work with other faith groups? Because I'm sure there are other similar restrictions that other students have, in whether it's dietary restriction or just holiday schedules or religious days. Is that part of what you're looking for when you say outreach and education?
Thank you for the question. And you make an excellent point. Historically, every time we have been successful in passing legislation, the way we find that we're most successful is that we have a coalition of different, a diverse coalition, whether it's legislation or whether it's, to get a new initiative. For example, I know that we have a representative from Chicago Public Schools, and recently CPS instituted a kosher and halal program in school districts where in schools within the district where there's either Jewish, Muslim, or both population. And the public schools in my neighborhood now serve both kosher and halal because there was an effort to bring an awareness through an alliance between different faith communities. And other times, we work on legislation. I happen to be in Springfield right now, the capital of Illinois, where I am part of a number of coalitions, and one of them is a faith coalition that works specifically on issues that affect the faith community. While we haven't introduced legislation that resembles what I've described today yet, if we were to do such a thing, or if such legislation was to be proposed, we would, of course, rally other members of our coalition and try to do as much outreach as possible to other groups that, that have similar issues, or at least understand the importance of protecting religious liberty or making accommodations for faith-based groups.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
So next, I will ask Mark Kalaguas if he has any questions for our speaker.
Thank you so much. I think, Rabbi, you may have already started addressing that just now, but I was curious to see if, your organization or coalition partners, already had some draft language or draft provisions that you were advocating for in terms of updating or introducing new legislation, and if you, had kind of some major bullet points as to, what those changes would be.
So what I'm in my testimony that I'm going to be submitting to the commission for the public record, it'll have links, including a link to the New Jersey legislation. I think that that kind of language could be model language that we could use. I don't have any drafts from LRB from the Illinois General Assembly, but I think that's something that we can work off of, and if other groups agree, hopefully we can model something after the New Jersey bill and prevent something similar that happened in New Jersey from happening here.
Yeah, that'd be great to take a look at. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. And then Jonathan Bean, do you have a question for the rabbi?
Yes, thank you. Rabbi, I'm just asking for clarification. You discussed the nursing schools and accommodations, and I was a little unclear about that. The clinicals and the practicum conflicts, was that related to the Jewish Sabbath, or was it another issue?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, there's no question that most of the conflicts that nursing students experience are with clinicals that take place on Jewish holidays. The Jewish holidays, every year, the calendar is different. It could fall out on all weekdays and not weekends. And then it just, it becomes a big challenge because clinicals are usually, they'll schedule them every Wednesday or every, Monday and Thursday or something like that. And then it's almost inevitable that one of those days will end up being a Jewish holiday, sometime during the year. So it becomes a challenge with that. Sometimes it becomes a challenge with the Sabbath as well. Sometimes they schedule clinicals on weekends, but it also becomes a problem with on Fridays during the winter when the sun sets early and the Sabbath starts as early as 4 p.m. and the workday ends at 5. So it could be an issue also with the Jewish Sabbath.
Thank you.
Thanks. I also have a couple of questions for you. One question is following up on this issue of conflict between nursing clinicals or other licensing professionals and Jewish practices. You mentioned the idea of better education. And is there a method or an organization that you're recommending that we might follow to educate the larger higher education community about these issues?
So there are a lot of organizations, I think, out there that do a wonderful job. I can tell you that I'm biased, but I think that we do a pretty good job, wherever we're given the opportunity to try to address these types of issues, not just in Illinois, but really across the country. We're the largest and the oldest Jewish umbrella organization throughout the country, representing the interests of the Orthodox Jewish community and, fighting for their rights and interests. So, where there's another organization that, locally can help, we try to partner again with, whoever we can, but this is something that we've been doing for a long time.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, you've talked about the problems that students have sort of once they're in a higher education environment. Are you aware of students who are foregoing college or university or other technical training because of concerns about the inability to mesh their religious observances with their education?
Madam Chair, that is an excellent question, and the answer is unequivocally, absolutely yes. I'm glad you brought that up. This happens all the time where, we try to make career choices that are compatible with our way of life. And when we look at the different challenges that exists with, every field comes with its own challenges. But we, for us, that our religious way of life is a priority, and we don't live to work, we work to live. So that is a primary consideration, and we look for fields that are going to be the most accommodating, generally speaking, to our way of life.
All right, thank you. We appreciate very much your testimony. We do have a couple of more minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and ask my committee members if you have a second question that you would like to ask based on anything you just heard. I could allow a second question before we move on.
I have a question. There's a controversy currently over standardized test exams and the way they may be used to restrict, in particular, Asian Americans. Many have drawn parallels with past Jewish experience in higher education. Does your group have a position or thoughts on this issue?
So I'm glad you brought that up. I have to do more research, to be honest, about standardized tests in higher education, but I know that we face a huge challenge when it comes to the standardized testing in the state of Illinois on the elementary and high school levels, because our students, those that are that participate in what's called the Invest in Kids Act, it's a state program that helps low-income children get access to to the school of their choice, but they're required to take the state assessment. And what we find year after year is that there's culturally insensitive material in the standardized tests that we don't want to expose our children to. And then, we have this challenge or this choice, like, do we expose them to things that are incompatible with our value system and the way we educate our children, or do we forego the scholarships? And my guess is that there's something similar. There are similar challenges in higher ed, but I can't tell you for sure because I haven't done the research yet. So I don't want to say explicitly until I look into it. But now that you brought it up, I will look into it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Other committee members, we do have a couple more minutes. All right, I'm not hearing from committee members, so I will just say thank you again, Rabbi Soroka. We really appreciate your testimony, taking the time to come and speak with us today. So that was great.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Anna. Thank you for being so accommodating with my schedule and making the adjustments. It was really an honor and a pleasure.
Great, and we look forward to your written testimony as well.
All the best. Take care.
All right. So we will now move to our second speaker for today, and that is Jenny Nagaoka, who is the Deputy Director for the Consortium on School Research at the University of Chicago. And so I will now turn it over to her. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I have some slides that I need to share. Make sure I'm doing this. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay, good, thank you. So first I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak about my research on post-secondary access and success. So I've been doing research in this area for over 15 years at the Consortium on School Research, and more recently with the To and Through project. And throughout this time, we've worked closely with the Chicago Public Schools, and most recently with Dr. Heidi Truax and her team, who will be speaking next. And so throughout this time, we provided a lot of close guidance to their efforts to have more of their students attend and complete college. I'm going to be speaking in three parts. First, tracking the progress of attainment for Chicago Public School students. Next, I'm going to be highlighting some research that actually goes back to 2008, which guided a lot of the efforts that CPS has had, and could provide some guidance for similar efforts across the state and across the country. And then finally, I'll be highlighting a few findings from more recent research that can point to where higher ed can go next and what kind of supports might be needed in that area. So I'm starting with trends in college attainment and of Chicago public school students. So I'll be looking at real quickly at high school graduation, college enrollment at both 2-year and 4-year colleges, and then at college completion. So starting out, we're looking at students who enroll in 4-year colleges, but I want you to look first at the part of the figure on the left. So starting with high school graduation. So CPS graduation rate has increased by 16 percentage points over the last 10 years. So now it's currently at 83% as of 2020. So we've seen a tremendous amount of growth over the past 10 years. And this is actually even more remarkable when we realize that going back to about 2000, the rate was hovering around 50%. And one of the things I also want to note about this is that the graduation rate has risen across all racial, ethnic, and gender groups. And so that rates for all groups are at least at 75%. It's also important to note that the high school graduation rates are actually a little bit higher for students who started school being classified as English learners compared to students who were never classified as English learners. And also the rates for students who are classified with disabilities are only slightly lower than the overall high school graduation rate for the district. So we're seeing a lot of remarkable change around high school graduation. Next, I wanted to take a look at the part of the figure in the middle where we see 4-year college graduation rates. We're also seeing some important increases. So between 2010 and 2020, we've seen a 6 percentage point increase. So now it's at 41%, which is actually pretty close to what the national average is. And this rate was actually a little bit higher prior to the pandemic. And then finally, I think probably most importantly, we're also seeing rising college completion rates among students who started off at a 4-year college. So that now 56% of students who make an immediate transition to a 4-year college are completing within 6 years. And this number includes bachelor's degrees, associate degrees, and certificate completion. So we're seeing some really important improvements in the rates in Chicago. Next, I wanted to look at 2-year college enrollment rates. So this is the same graph, but for students who started off at 2-year colleges. And the story is a little bit different here. So looking at 2-year college enrollment rates comparing 2010 to 2020, we're actually seeing a slight decline in the enrollment rates for 2-year colleges. And this is actually largely a phenomenon that we're seeing in 2020 due to the pandemic. Prior to that, the rates have been holding more or less around 20%, and we were actually seeing a slight increase until the pandemic hit. And this is something that we're also seeing nationally, where 2-year college enrollment rates were significantly impacted by the pandemic. And this makes a lot of sense given who the population of who goes, who attends 2-year colleges. They tend to be students of color who also are living in communities that were really vulnerable to different things that were happening during the pandemic. The good news here, though, is that we are seeing a slight increase in completion rates for students who start off at 2-year colleges. So over the past 10 years, it's gone up slightly by about 3 percentage points. Although I think the other thing that I also want to highlight is the fact that it's really only slightly over a quarter of students who start off at a 2-year college who've completed some kind of degree or certificate within 6 years. And I also want to show these rates by race ethnicity. So here we are looking at trends in college enrollment for combining 2-year and 4-year colleges by race ethnicity. I'm going to focus on the patterns for the Latino students who are in yellow and the Black students who are in blue on this figure. And I also want to note here, I'm showing these by race ethnicity, but these are masking some patterns that we see by gender. So we've seen that Latino students have seen over a 10 percentage point increase between 2010 and 2020 in their college enrollment rates. although we're seeing a slight decline more recently, and this is largely because of declines in the two-year college enrollment rate. The story is different for Black students, where the rate of college enrollment has actually declined slightly over the past 10 years. And again, two-year college enrollment rates are playing a role here. Okay. Next, I also wanted to show you really quickly about English learners as well. So for students who began elementary school compared to students who were never classified as English learners. And I think this is one thing that's really probably a little bit surprising for many people, is the fact that students who began elementary school as English learners actually are enrolling in college at slightly higher rates than students who were never classified as English learners. So this is kind of changing a little bit of the narrative of the educational trajectories of students who begin school as English learners. Although I do want to point out that English students who began school as English learners are slightly more likely to be enrolled in two-year colleges versus four-year colleges. So the overall rates are very similar, but the underlying patterns are slightly different. Next, I wanted to turn to the important issue around college completion. So here we are looking at students who started off at a four-year college. And so overall for the district, 56% of students who begin at a four-year college complete a degree or certificate. So this includes associate degrees within 6 years. This number is very similar to the national rates, although it is slightly lower. Although I think one thing that's really important to note is that this number is hiding some important variability by gender and race ethnicity. And in particular, Black young men, Black young women, and Latino young men who start at a four-year college are substantially less likely to complete college, especially when you're comparing them to their peers across the city. Although in contrast, Latino young women actually complete college at rates that are slightly higher than the CPS average. And this is the same figure looking at students who start off at two-year colleges. So we're seeing similar patterns here, although the overall rates are lower. So we're seeing a lot of differences by race, ethnicity, and gender, and they largely mirror what we saw for four-year college rates. Okay, so I'm kind of going through a lot of things here. So I've given you a lot of rates, but I think to really kind of understand the magnitude of the change that has happened in Chicago and what the Chicago public schools have really done is looking at the numbers of students. So we're looking at here is the changes over time in the number of students who are enrolling in college and the number of students who are completing college. So if you look at the top here, that is the number of students who are making an immediate transition to college. And when you compare 2007 to 2020, there are over 4,000 more CPS graduates who are attending college. And this was actually a little bit higher prior to the pandemic. And then if you look on the left side in the darker blue, this shows us how many students are completing bachelor's degrees. And when you compare 2007 to 2013, we're actually seeing that there are 1,500 more CPS graduates who are completing a bachelor's degree every single year. And then if you look in the green, which represents students, the number of students who have completed certificate or associate degrees, this number has actually doubled during this time point, so that now there are 1,500 students who are completing an associate degree or a two-year degree. Or a certificate. And so we've seen so I think this is a really important dramatic change in the educational attainment that's happening among CPS graduates. But I also don't want to forget the students represented by the gray area on this figure, who are students who start college but do not complete. And you can see here is that is actually a very large portion of students who are having a college experience, accruing debt, but are actually not coming out of that experience with a degree or a certificate. And I'll be talking a little bit about that later on in my presentation. Okay, here I'm going to fly through some findings from a report that came out in 2008 called Potholes on the Road to College. And we're going to be highlighting some of the key findings that I think really shaped a lot of the strategies that the Chicago Public Schools used to increase the college enrollment rate numbers. So the first one, this is kind of an unusual figure, but we're trying to actually take a look at the different steps that students need to take before they enroll in college. So if you take 100% of students who have college aspirations, so they say, I want to complete a bachelor's degree, we're seeing that over a quarter, this is going back to, these are old numbers too, so this is not reflective of the current state of things in CPS. But at the time, over a quarter of students who said they wanted to complete a bachelor's degree weren't even planning to enroll in college in the fall. And then we see another set of students who said that they did not apply to college. And then there's another set of students who applied but were not accepted. And then there's also a set of students who are accepted to college but are not enrolling, what's commonly known as summer melt now. And so I think what this sort of gave us here was this picture of all the different pieces that students need to go to and where they need support all along the way. And we can't be paying attention to just one part of this. This is a long process where students need a lot of structured supports within their schools, particularly for first-generation college students who cannot rely on their parents to provide that kind of information and support. And we saw these patterns were really consistent across race, ethnicity. The magnitude of where they were was different, but it wasn't like one type of student, or this is also true of achievement. So it wasn't like high achieving students hit all these marks perfectly. They tended to apply, but they were still struggling, particularly with the final part of enrolling after they had been accepted. So this really kind of points to a key role that schools can play, in particular college counseling, and having those kinds of resources so they're able to provide the kind of supports that students need, particularly first-generation students of color, in order to be enrolling in college. Another place that we saw as being really important was around FAFSA, so completion of financial aid. So here we are looking at students who reported being accepted to a four-year college, and then compared students who said they had completed a FAFSA versus those who did not. And so we look at students who've been accepted to a four-year college and completed a FAFSA. The vast majority of them ended up enrolling in college that fall. But the story is really different for students who said they had been accepted but did not complete the FAFSA. So just a little over half of them are enrolled in a four-year college. Another 10% had enrolled in a two-year college, but a third of them did not enroll in college at all. So this really kind of spurred a lot of efforts inside of CPS, a lot of collaboration with ISAC to make sure that they were getting data and creating systems of support so that students were completing the FAFSA, and this was not a barrier to enrolling in college. So this is certainly not, this doesn't fix all kinds of problems, but this is a necessary condition for students to be enrolling in college. Finally, in this section, I'm going to show you, this is a fairly complicated figure. So we're looking at college graduation rates by college, by students' GPA. And so each line here represents a different college that is commonly attended by CPS students. And then it shows their graduation rate within 6 years by students' GPA. So I think the first thing I want to highlight here is the fact that GPA matters, right? So regardless of what college you attend, the higher your GPA, the more likely you are to graduate. That sort of seems very logical. But the other thing to note is that, like, on the bottom end, so it's for students with the 2.0, regardless of where students go, they're highly unlikely to graduate from college. And then, but I think what was most surprising to us when we were doing this research was looking at students who had about a 4.0 GPA. So here, there's a huge amount of variability in the percentage of students who graduate from college within 6 years. So that college choice really matters, and it actually matters the most for the students with high GPAs, and these are also the students who have the most college choices. And so really providing those kinds of supports and really thinking about the kinds of experiences that are happening for students in college. And this also pointed us, which is something I'll be getting a little bit more into my next section, is how important, like the enormous role that higher ed plays in this story. Academic preparation in high school can only do so much, that there's a huge role for colleges to be playing to ensure that more students are completing college. Okay, and then I'm going to turn to more recent research on 2- and 4-year college completion. And looking at a few key points here. So the first one is something that I've actually was sort of highlighting earlier in my report. So here we're looking at the students who actually completed a bachelor's degree on the left, an associate degree or certificate kind of for the middle group, and then on the right side, students who did not complete a degree or a certificate. And the thing that really stands out is that if you look at who actually completes a bachelor's degree or an associate degree or certificate, the vast majority of them made an immediate transition to college. You know, in some ways this feels kind of obvious because if you don't go to college, you can't complete. But the students who don't start off in college immediately are considerably less likely to complete anything. And certainly some of them never intended to complete a college degree, even though we know that close to 90% of students do, as seniors, do say that they do want to complete something, but people change their minds and things like that. But this important point of having a handoff between high school to college immediately really makes a big difference for whether or not students are likely to complete. And I also, the other part I want to talk about too, is kind of those students that were in that gray area who don't complete, and thinking about what might be happening with them, just to complicate the story a bit more, because I think quite often we think about students go to college and they complete, but there's a huge amount of things that are happening in between those two time points. So one thing I think that surprised us in this research study was how many students are taking off at least one term or are leaving college at some point in time. So if you look at students who start off at a 2-year college, 83% of those students are taking a term off. Some of them are coming back to college, but a lot of them, and then some of them don't. But I think what was even more surprising is the fact that if you look at students who start off at a 4-year college, a little bit over half of them are also taking off a term. Some of them are coming back, some of them don't, but the students who take off at least one term are considerably less likely to finish. And certainly this isn't quite like a causal argument because there's a lot of reasons why students take time off, but I think this really sort of helps us think about the importance in higher ed to be figuring out what are these things that are causing students to take time off. You know, some of it could be academic, but we know that students who did well in high school are, sometimes are, academic struggle is usually not the biggest thing. Sometimes this is financial, sometimes it's a social piece, but there's a lot of things that colleges can be doing to help prevent students from leaving college. And then finally, for my last 2 points, is thinking about the transfer issue. There's also a lot of movement between 4-year colleges and 2-year colleges. So if you look at students who make an immediate transition to a 4-year college, 3 of them, like 3 out of 10, are making a transfer to a 2-year college at some point in time. Some of them stay there, some of them ultimately, some of them go back to 4-year colleges, some of them leave. But this is a really common pattern, which really kind of points to the importance of articulation agreements so that credits are transferring, making sure that there's a handoff for the types of supports that students need. And then finally, I'm going to be talking about the transfer in the opposite direction. I think this is what we think about the most when we think about movement between 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges, where students start off at a 2-year college to save money so they can ultimately get a bachelor's degree. However, this pattern is really uncommon. So only 1 in 5 students who start off at a 2-year college end up transferring to a four-year college. So actually this pattern is less common than the 4 to 2 year transfer pattern. And then of the students who start off at a 2-year college, only 7% of them are ultimately completing a bachelor's degree within 6 years. So this 2 to 4 year pathway, you know, I think it should be a really, you know, it's an important option for students, but it's one that currently is not working well for a lot of students. So I think there's been a lot of efforts being put forth by city colleges and other community colleges right now, which are reflected in these numbers, but I think it's something where there has to be a lot more consideration about how to make sure that the handoff between 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges is being done in a way that students are able to make that transition and also to be successful once they do. And from here, I will conclude my remarks and turn it over to Dr. Truax. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to go through our research.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And I know I have some questions for you, but I think we will hold those questions until we hear from Dr. Truax and her colleagues. So let me introduce them now. Dr. Heidi Truax is the Executive Director for the Office of School Counseling and Postsecondary Advising, Chicago Public Schools, and she will be co-presenting with Dr. Miguel Saucedo, Director of Postsecondary Strategic Interventions, and Eric Williams, Director of College Pathways. So at this point, I will turn it over to them and we will hear their presentations, and then we'll come back and take questions from our committee members. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to confirm, can you see my slides? Wonderful. So thank you so much for that kind introduction, Madam Chairman. Since you introduced us, I'm going to go ahead and keep it moving. But I want to start with just letting you know that we are not joined today by someone that very much wanted to be with you. So our CEO, Pedro Martinez, was unable to be with us today. You might not know, but we're running a trades fair right now for over 3,000 students, at which he is currently speaking to young people. So he was unable to be with us, but he did want to share some remarks. So I'm going to play a short video from our CEO, and if someone can just give me an early thumbs up that the audio is working, I would appreciate it.
Hello everyone, I'm Chicago Public School CEO Pedro Martinez, and I'm honored to be addressing you all today. I am sorry that I'm not able to join you live to discuss the strides we have made to help our graduates access meaningful post-secondary opportunities. But I know that Dr. Truax and the rest of my team will do a great job providing you more details about the overview that I will outline. When I became CEO of CPS last year, one of the first announcements I was able to be part of was highlighting a record high graduation rate of 83.8%. This is an increase of more than 20 percentage points from where CPS was a decade ago, representing tens of thousands more CPS students who are graduating from high school on their way to a bright future. There are several concrete steps we've taken to achieve this. First, we know it is more essential than ever to help every student solidify a concrete post-secondary plan that reflects their interests and will lead to a fruitful career. This is especially important when you remember that a majority of our students are students of color from economically disadvantaged communities. These students don't always have the support they need at home to fully prepare for and navigate their futures. At CPS, we feel that we're leading the way for large urban school districts in this area. Our Learn, Plan, Succeed initiative, which makes a post-secondary plan a graduation requirement, has been a game changer to connect our students with pathways that challenge them and build upon their passions they discover in our classrooms. As a result of this initiative, 97.5% of our class of 2021 submitted a post-secondary plan, and 81.9% of those students graduated with plans to attend college or pursue another post-secondary opportunity. These students also earned over $1 billion in college scholarships, which leads me to our next strategy. Our staff works tirelessly to ensure that Chicago students are maximizing their ability to secure financing for their next step. While FAFSA completion rates have decreased nationally over the past several years, ours actually increased by more than 5 percentage points between 2018-19 and the 2021 school year. In the coming years, we want to provide more school-based mentorship for our students and families on topics such as financial aid and deciding between different post-secondary pathways. This year already, we've added 64 student counseling positions to help many more students reach their goals. Third, we work hard to support students after they leave CPS, working hard to connect many of our students with alumni coordinators to prevent summer melt and to increase college enrollment for our recent graduates. We've also have a newfound focus on college persistence to help students stay on track and complete their degrees after they leave CPS. All of these investments tie back to one goal, helping our students develop into future leaders of our city and world. As a district, we're so proud to be leading the way in building up the next generation. Thank you.
All right. So as CEO Martinez mentioned, we've had a significant number of successes in CPS, and I think Jenny highlighted some of those as well. Our goal with our time with you today is to really highlight some areas where we know we still have a lot of growth, some specific populations we're not sure that you've heard much about yet, and the unique barriers that they're facing in regards to post-secondary access and attainment. So as CEO Martinez mentioned, with the Learn, Plan, Succeed initiative, we've had really high success in getting meaningful post-secondary plans evidenced by our graduating seniors. In fact, the 2 years that Learn, Plan, Succeed has been a graduation requirement, we've had 97.5% of students submit that evidence. And consistently over those 2 years, we see about 80%, this is for the class of 21, 81.9% of students that are submitting their meaningful post-secondary plan shows that where they want to go is a 2 or 4 year college. Yet that plan is not always turning into a reality, as Jenny just covered, right? While 8 and 10 of them intend to go to college, we're only seeing about 6 of those 10 enrolling in college, and a little more than 3 of them attaining a college credential. And we know that this attrition has a strong correlation with some of the priority populations that this committee is really seeking to remove barriers and close opportunity gaps for. And CPS has a large number of students that fall under these protected classes. So some of the demographics are here on the right for you. I want to just call out the high number of economically disadvantaged students, and a number of people will tell you that number actually is not as high as it should be because it's based on 2020 when lunch form acquiring was quite difficult, right? So previously that number was above 70%, and we anticipate that it likely is this year as well. And also just want to call down, we have no way, nor should we have a way to document which of our students are undocumented, but based on a number of leading indicators, we estimate that between 10 to 15% of our student population is undocumented. One of the major strategies that's sort of all-encompassing for CPS is around access to school counselors. So you heard CEO Martinez mention that we added 64 school counselors last school year. They announced with school budgets this past Friday that we will be supporting another 53 positions coming into CPS schools for school counselors. And the reason we prioritize school counselors is that there is now 20 years of research that shows us that school counselors who follow the American School Counselor Association national model have a targeted improvement in students at all leading indicators for post-secondary. So GPAs go up, test scores go up, we see more in participation in dual credit, dual enrollment, AP and IB programs, stronger engagement in college applications, and FAFSA. That national recommendation for the school counselor to student ratio is 1 to 250. Yet the national average is 1 to 415. And Illinois actually has the second highest school counselor ratio in the country. We are following Arizona. They're the only ones that are worse. Where for one school counselor in our state, there are 665 students. Now, CPS has made this a priority, particularly over the last 5 years. Our current district average is 1 to 348 when we look across. But when we look at elementary school, it's not quite as pretty. We're up to 1 to 406. And at the high school level, we're really getting close to that recommendation of 1 to 255, which we absolutely know is one of the significant contributors to our high FAFSA rate, increased graduation rate, and other post-secondary improvements we've made over the last decade. With that, I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleague, Mr. Eric Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Truax. Can you hear me, everyone? Just want to point out that CPS is very much aware that we have a number of students, significant numbers of students who have special needs, our English learners, our diverse learners, students with IEPs, for example. And we work very hard and intentionally to meet their needs and provide the supports that they have while we have them. But one of the challenges when they transition to post-secondary or higher education is that it becomes their responsibility to make their hidden disability and needs known and to request the academic and other supports that they need. And despite our best efforts to prepare students to do so, this often prevents students from persisting when they get into post-secondary education. I will turn the mic over to my colleague, Dr. Saucedo, for the next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. After 20 years of tracking post-secondary data, we see that our African-American and Latinx males lag behind their counterparts. The data shows that in 2020, the college enrollment rate for Black males was 47%, for Latinx males was 54%. For this particular group, we also see there are many factors that intersect, such as class, race, and gender that really impact disciplinary practices, high school completion, college enrollment, and graduation outcomes. We recognize this stark reality, and as a result, we have launched several youth-led initiatives, such as the Young Men of Color Summit, Black Latinx Male Collectives, Youth Voice Committees to develop a district-wide strategic plan to ensure their needs are met. For immigrant students, such as DACA and undocumented students, we also see there are many factors that intersect, such as class, language, and citizenship that impact high school completion, college enrollment, graduation, and employment outcomes. For example, the current DACA policy has many barriers, such as eligibility limitations, only accepting renewal applications for the moment, the high fees for each application, which is $495 for each one, which sometimes they have to do it every 2 years, and only a few licenses have been open to DACA holders. Since 2003 to 2018, we have seen a few laws that have helped immigrant students access higher education, like in-state tuition, mandated training for high school counselors, lifting the ban on professional licenses. Since 2018, CPS developed systems of support to provide holistic services to undocumented students that provide post-secondary advising, scholarship funds, mental health, legal and tax assistance, and much more. I will transition back to Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Saucedo. As Dr. Truax pointed out, many of our students are economically disadvantaged or low income. And because of that, we've known that we have to help them to apply for financial aid, that it's critical for their access and enrollment in the higher education. And we've done a very good job of that, as you heard in the UFC research over time, completing the FAFSA in particular. But of course, not all of our students are eligible or comfortable with completing the free application for federal student aid. And so we have to help them apply for other sources of aid. And thankfully, the state has come up with very helpful legislation in their own application called the RISE Act application for transgender and undocumented students to apply for state funding. We diligently help all of our students in those categories to complete that application, realizing that often that's not enough funding or money for them to access the opportunities and have the options and opportunities that they need. So we've been developing our own systems of support, our own Dream Fund, working closely with NUSA and other organizations to develop and find our students opportunities to access other forms of financial aid. In addition, we're also working hard to help our other students who are homeless through our students in temporary living situations office. We work very closely with them to help those students who are impacted by housing crises to access sources of financial aid. Turn it back over to Dr. Truax at this point.
Thank you, Eric. So finally, we just wanted to raise your awareness around the importance that the Developmental Education Reform Act that was recently passed in Illinois really has made for CPS students. I'm sure many of you are aware that this act indicated to all college, city colleges and community colleges that they could and should consider a number of different criteria when determining a student's eligibility for college level coursework rather than remedial coursework. Previously, colleges very often, in fact, I think every single one of them, was solely looking at either SAT, ACT scores or at their campus level English and math requirement tests. What this law has done has allowed our community colleges to say instead, we can consider just your GPA. So, and with 3.0 being the maximum. So for many of our community colleges, they are choosing a 3.0 as an indicator. So if a student is graduating with a 3.0 high school GPA, they're automatically being placed in college level courses. Some of our community colleges are going as low as 2.75. But if we just look at that 3.0 cut mark, for CPS students, that means that an additional 17% of our students are immediately placed in and taking college courses. This is incredibly important when we think not only about access, but particularly persistence and success, because those remedial courses are not covered by financial aid. So often, the number one reason that we see students take a semester off, as Jenny highlighted, or stop out of college completely, it's because of financial barriers. And particularly for our students in populations where they're automatically placing into remedial courses, the likelihood of that financial barrier is increased significantly. So to tease this out just a little bit further, I want to call out specifically that this change in being able to consider just GPA for college level courses is even more significant when we break it down by at a disaggregate level for race. 60% of our Black students, 60% more of our Black students would qualify for college credit-bearing coursework by using this sole GPA criteria, and 46% of our Latinx students qualify. And then the numbers go through the roof when we consider our diverse learner and English language learner populations, for whom we know that standardized tests are not equitable. They are not set up in a way that supports their success or reflects their ability to learn and their skill set. So here we see for our diverse learner population that it would allow a 236% increase in their ability to take college courses, and for English language learners, a 511% increase. So as we close, we really just wanted to make some big recommendations, some things that, might be just shooting for the moon, but always, always, always want to put before anyone that will listen and ask for FAFSA to expand to include our undocumented students. Additionally, we would love to see work around DACA to be more inclusive to new applicants and those who are currently not eligible. An emergency fund to support that DACA application. That $495 is an absolute barrier to that status that we know can be life-changing for individuals and families. Would love to see Illinois become a model for the country around the multiple measures policy that would allow GPA to be used autonomously to determine college course level placement. Also would just love to see increased policies and supports for our partners in higher education in knowing how to identify and support diverse learner students and destigmatize diverse learning needs and English language learner needs so that students do use those advocacy skills we're working hard to equip them with. And then finally, we know that there's been a lot proposed, but have yet to see anything enacted. We would love to see a state or federal policy that would require the nationally recommended school counselor to student ratio or other preparatory supports, such as required instructional minutes around college and career readiness that are shown to drive post-secondary access, enrollment, persistence, and success. So on behalf of myself, CEO Martinez, and my tremendous colleagues, the godfather of post-secondary education and CPS, Mr. Eric Williams, who really started that vision back in 2003 and has been with us ever since, and Dr. Saucedo, who is an absolute change maker for all of our students in these protected populations. We really appreciate your time and this opportunity today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that really informative testimony. And I love that you ended with some specific recommendations that we could take away as well. So I'm going to go back to my colleagues on the committee and give them a chance to ask questions of any of our speakers. So I'll start in alphabetical order this time and ask Jonathan Bean if he would like to go first.
Yes, thank you, Cindy. My question is for Dr. Nagaoka. The data you provided were very informative, and I hope and trust they'll be submitted to the committee for our deliberations. In the differences between different racial groups in their graduation rates, attending college, dropping out of college, there was a strong gender gap between men and women. Is there any, do you have any discussion of the male underperformance in all racial groups, but especially Black, Latino, but also white?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a great explanation for it directly. I mean, I think this is something that it's a consistent pattern across, whether it's GPAs or college going, there's a lot of things going on. But I think, you know, fundamentally, it's like there's something different about the experience that male students have within schools. I mean, we've done some work looking at, for example, the grades that young men get versus young women get, like in the same schools and in the same classrooms. And we can't actually explain it in terms of attendance, behavior, things like that. It feels like there's something different about the kind of, how the kind of experience that they have, the kind of supports that they're receiving within schools and within colleges. And it's not something that we can actually point to in terms of the characteristics that we see about the students themselves. It's something that seems to be happening around them. I don't know if my colleagues from CPS care to jump in to respond to that as well, because I feel like you have a little bit more direct experience. I'm sort of doing this through the data, but I feel like you might have more experience in terms of speaking with yourselves, or also speaking with school practitioners or others.
I would love to, Jenny. Thank you for the pass. As Jenny said, there is many factors that we don't necessarily want to assume that those are the real reasons why the low, whether it's college enrollment, whether it's the low rates of scholarships or college graduation. Keep in mind that because there's different factors that contribute to the reality, we have to be mindful of them. So when we talk about the zero tolerance policy, or we talk about suspension and expulsion, primarily African-American, Latino boys and students with disabilities are more likely to get suspended and expelled. That already impacts the high school graduation completion, which we know if you don't graduate high school, you won't go to college. That is just by default. In addition, we also have to be realistic that the school to prison or the prison industrial complex is very real. We know that the prison system here in Illinois and across the country primarily targets males. In Cook County Jail, there is 11 divisions, 10 of them are primarily for males, 1 for women. So you can already see that even within the prison industrial complex, males are primarily targeted. We also see that within our family structures, males are probably pressured more to seek out employment and not necessarily college right away after college, because they're seen as either the breadwinners, they have to help the family. They're probably sibling parenting, meaning that they take care of the younger siblings. There's these responsibilities that we don't necessarily know how to really pin it down to say, this is the main factor. I think it's complex, and that we just have to be mindful of all these items. In addition, we have to provide more of those youth spaces to actually capture what their real needs are, so they can clearly tell us, rather than us assuming what the factors are. This is what's leading into the work that we're doing with the Black Student Union or collective, the Latinx male collective, to actually go into the schools and have these listening circles so we can actually really assess what the situation is, so that way we can, on our side as the adults, provide a strategic plan, support models, all of these kind of things to really ensure that they're going to have the assistance needed to actually get to and through. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So next I'm going to go to Mark Calaguas. Do you have?
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for everybody for providing, the very thorough quantitative data. I do want to kind of remain on the demographic information that was presented, both in the University of Chicago and the CPS slides, particularly, the category of APIs, Asian American Pacific Islanders. I think there's a growing realization that, this group is not a monolith, and that there's a persistent lack of data disaggregation. So if we look at, East Asian, South, Southeast, and Pacific Islander, they all have, different histories of migration, socioeconomic status, language fluency, educational attainment, and that, this important indicators are often obscured by lumping everybody into one API category. So I want to ask, anybody in this group are you aware of any efforts at refining the collection of this data in order to obtain a more accurate picture of the diverse communities under this umbrella term and the diverging outcomes for the different communities that are subsumed into this larger category?
I think Jenny might be the best to speak to this, but I will speak for CPS that with the rollout of the equity framework, that is feedback that we as a district got in a resounding way, right? And so some effort has been made, like if when we send our materials, you'll see in the demographics I showed you, one of the changes that has come in the last 2 years is that we no longer clump as API. There is an Asian subset, and then Hawaiian and Pacific Islander is looked at separately. So that is a first step of something that needs further disaggregation for sure. And I know our data systems are working together to figure out how do the data labels, so to speak, really represent our populations. And right now, some of the structures aren't in place in order for that reporting to be possible. So the infrastructure is where they're really attending to make sure that they have that level of disaggregation available so that it can be presented appropriately.
Yeah, I don't think I have a huge amount to add. I mean, I think the issue that you raised is something that there's been a lot of internal conversation about, and also in the research community, because I think just looking at any kind of outcomes, whether it's educational or workforce outcomes, there's clearly a huge amount of variation within the AAPI community that gets completely masked by the numbers that we do. And I will have to acknowledge, CPS has actually done better in terms of disaggregation because they have separated out Pacific Islanders, and because CPS doesn't serve a whole lot of students who fall into the Pacific Islander group, we have recombined them with Asian Americans, which I think is probably something that we have talked a lot about what the best way to do this is, because otherwise, because of the low numbers of students, for confidentiality reasons, you would not report them at all. But that can also be misleading in another way. So I think this is something that it's a big discussion among my team. It's also a big discussion in the research community about how to do this, given that there are some data limitations, and also just sometimes in certain areas there just aren't as many students in there, and so we are unable to actually report on certain groups at all, which also feels problematic. But we have not come up with a good solution, and so it's something that we're all grappling with right now.
Thank you. I'm glad this conversation is happening. It sounds very encouraging. So thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Next, I will give Tabassum Halim an opportunity to ask question.
Yes, thank you. I also want to echo my fellow commissioners that they the value of having so much quantitative data. It's very, very helpful to unpack this information in so many different categories. My question is regarding preparedness, being high schoolers being prepared for college, and you know, whether they're leaving high school prepared, or whether they're waiting till they get to college to catch up. I'm not sure if, you know, obviously the first choice, the better choice would be that they get what they need before they graduate from high school. But the bottom line is that if we keep lowering the bar for them to get into college, are we inadvertently just putting them in a no-win situation, just for the sake of increasing, you know, enrollment? What is why don't we, you know, maybe one of the things to do, maybe part of the focus should be that when they do get to college, that they should be entitled to credits and financial aid to take those remedial courses, just so that their chances of being well adjusted and being successful during those college years, and having those years be, you know, very empowering for them, instead of always feeling that they're struggling. And that was a long question, but I guess my briefly, in summary, I just want to ask how much effort or are we making to make sure that there's no stigma or disincentive to take remedial courses in college when the first choice of graduating high school successfully is not open to them?
No, thank you for your question. I think probably like the first thing I want to point out that I think is all that I gave you a lot of numbers of it. Among them, I did not actually share with you is the fact that I think one of the really important aspects of the rising high school graduation rates in the Chicago public schools is that at the same time, we're also seeing rising ACT, SAT scores now, GPAs. More students are participating and passing AP courses. So on all these like different academic dimensions, so even as we're seeing more students graduating from high school, we're also seeing more and more students who are, according to all kinds of different metrics, are actually more prepared now than they were in the past. So I think it's a really important piece that these two efforts are not incompatible. The CPS is not increasing their graduation rates, at least by anything that we are capable of measuring, by lowering their standards. You know, everything has been going up. There's a lot of different things that really indicate some real changes that are happening inside of schools, and it's not just a matter of passing students on. But I think, you know, I think worrying about whether or not students are prepared for college is something I think that's like an ongoing concern. But I think, you know, and for some students, certainly, you know, preparation is an issue. But I think what is often overlooked in whether or not students are going on to college and being successful there is that academic struggles are actually not, you know, quite often they're not the biggest barrier that students are facing in staying in college and completing college. You know, there are a lot of financial barriers that come into play. You know, some of it are the expenses, you know, the financial expenses of like paying for tuition, but there's a lot of other day-to-day expenses that students encounter. So I think one thing to think about, like, especially for like students coming out of the Chicago public schools, you know, Dr. Truax and her team sort of showed us the number of students who who are low income, by going on to college, you don't suddenly have more money. You're still struggling to, you're struggling with food insecurity, maybe housing insecurity. All of these issues don't go away. And, and right now, I think colleges are becoming increasingly aware that the students who are now on their campuses today look very different than they did 20 years ago, but they still have a long way to go to really have the kind of supports that students need financially and otherwise to really be successful. And I think there's also a lot of kind of the social transition to college, about the way that colleges are quite often very bureaucratic, less than supportive, which can be really intimidating for a first generation college. Like, how do you navigate choosing your courses? How do you deal with it if you are struggling to pay your bill for college? All these different things are really difficult because quite often, first generation college students do not have the same kind of, they can't turn to a parent or a sibling to provide this kind of guidance. These are not things that they grew up with. So this also becomes a really big issue. And I think colleges are increasingly recognizing this, but this is still, having like kind of a fundamental institutional change and really rethinking how you're structuring your college campus, what kind of services you're providing. It's a sea change that I think we're just at the very beginning of, but it's something that I will also, sorry, long answer here, but it's also something I think, like particularly like in public institutions, like two-year colleges and public four-year colleges, where are the ones who are serving the most first generation college students of color who are facing these kind of challenges. They're also quite often the least funded of institutions. And so even though they are being what they're being asked to do has changed over time, they're not necessarily being funded in ways that actually match the changing needs at their institutions.
And if I can just add real quick, I do want to just call out that changing the bar doesn't necessarily mean lowering the bar, right? So specific to college placement and courses, I do want to just celebrate some of the research that Jenny didn't show you today, because we only get 15 minutes each, that really shows that it is high school GPA that is that strong indicator of college success. So by allowing GPA to be that placement metric rather than a test that's taken one time in that moment in time, let's honor the work that a student did over 4 years and the potentially 49 teachers that assessed them and scored them as earning above a 3.0 as a way to appropriately place them in college going courses. And then finally, I will just add that there is also some work to really address where those placement needs often, where a gap typically exists. So transitional math and transitional English really is meant to be that fourth year course that is offered at the high school district level in collaboration with, for us, city colleges, right? To ensure that that student really is meeting all the college going competencies to achieve appropriately once they enter college. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Can I add that there's several states that have seen that remedial education in higher ed just does not work. California, Texas, for example, they have banned remedial education in favor of co-requisite support courses where students go into higher ed taking the regular math and English courses with a support course attached. And they're finding that students are doing significantly better, like twice that's better when they're taking the regular English and math courses as opposed to the remedial education courses. It's just not working. I'm glad to see Illinois coming around to recognize that and using other factors and supports to assist students as they make their transition.
Thank you very much. Before I go to the next committee members' questions, I did want to remind members of the public that you can raise your hand and you can let our staff know by typing in the chat if you have a question, and we can add your name to the list for questions. So with that, I'm going to turn to our other committee member, Greg Sanford, who's with us today, and see if he has questions for our panel.
Thank you. I do not have questions for the panel, but I did want to echo the thanks that everyone else has expressed. You've all raised really important issues and provided us with incredibly insightful data, which I have just found incredibly helpful in the work that we're doing. So again, I wanted to say thanks.
All right. I do have a couple of clarifying questions I'd like to ask. And one is, you're using a term called diverse learners. And I wondered if you could just define that for the committee so I'm clear on exactly what you mean by diverse learners.
Absolutely. So in our districts, we use the term diverse learners for any student who has an IEP, and for a subset of students that have what are called 504s. So this can encompass a number of different learning disabilities, as well as behavioral needs that a student needs additional accommodations or supports for in order to be successful.
Thank you. Just wanted to be sure I understood how you were using that term. And then I have a specific question for Jenny, and that relates to the very last slide that you showed us. It had to do with transfers from 2-year to 4-year colleges, and you sort of had two graphics side by side, and I wasn't clear on the difference between the two graphics. One showed sort of 1 in 7, I think, and one showed maybe 1 in 5. Could you just explain that to us? And maybe you could even put that graphic up again so we could look at it together.
Sure. Hold on one second. Let me call up my presentation. Okay. Yeah, and I apologize for rushing through by getting to the end here. So, the question here was like around 2 to 4-year college transfers, and so I brought this up because that's sort of quite often guidance that's provided to students as a way of attaining a bachelor's degree. It's like you can save money, get your feet wet in the college experience before transferring over. So researchers find that this is not currently is not a terribly successful pathway. So if you look at students who start off at a 2-year college, so the fall after high school graduation, enroll in a 2-year college, only 1 in 5 of them are transferring to a 4-year college within 4 years. And when you survey, like when we did a survey of our students in their senior year, I forget the exact number, but it's like well over 80% of these students who are starting off at a 2-year college say that they would like to get a 4-year college degree. So it's not that these students are saying, I would just want to go to a 2-year college to get an associate degree or certificate. They have the intention of getting a 4-year college degree, but only 1 in 5 of them are even making that initial transition. And then ultimately, of those students, only 7% of them are actually attaining a bachelor's degree. So that's a really low success rate given the high rates of these students who actually want to get a 4-year college degree. And I think the one thing that is like important is that the students who do make this transfer from a 2-year college to a 4-year college do graduate at rates that are similar to students who started off at a 4-year college. So in some ways, the issue is right now is like the biggest issue is not around what happens to students once they arrive on a 4-year college campus. It's the fact that most students are not actually ever making that transition from a 2-year college to a 4-year college.
Okay, thank you. That really does help clarify it for me, so I understand that a little bit better. And then Dr. Truax, I wanted to go to your recommendations, and in particular with respect to undocumented students and DACA applicants. I understand that Illinois passed a new law which creates a position of a liaison for undocumented students on, I think, at least public university campuses in Illinois. Do you know if those offices have been created? If so, what they're doing or what they could be doing?
Madam Chair, I'm actually going to ask Dr. Saucedo to respond to that because he heads up our college compact. He works really intimately with 35 university partners. And I know this has been a priority for some of that work.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So at this moment, the bill did pass. I don't think it's going to be implemented until next year. They are working with just the 12 public universities in Illinois. So those are the 12 IHEs. They are thinking about incorporating budget and funding for those 12 liaisons. There's still some situations here that I want to make sure that that is not a solve-all law or bill. We are still lagging behind California and them leading laws and policies and practices for our undocumented students. So for instance, even though they might put a staff person as the liaison at the institution, that doesn't mean that that one individual will satisfy all of the needs for undocumented students. This is what I mean. In California, they have Dreamer Resource Centers. That means that the institution institutionalized undocumented supports by creating a center, by creating a budget, by creating a group of staff members who will support those students and not just solely putting the responsibility on one person. So what I'm asking for is that we need something even more robust that would ensure that there's all the wraparound services included in that bill and not just one-page staff.
Thank you. I know that is a new initiative and obviously we're lagging behind California, so I appreciate knowing about that as well. All right, so I think at this point we should give an opportunity for the public to comment. And so I would ask any members of the public who do want to provide comments to limit the comments to about 2 to 4 minutes each. If you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand by hovering your mouse over the smiley face and clicking on raise hand, or you can type in the chat. If you're joining by phone, you can press *3 to raise your hand. And please also know that you can submit written comments by email to Anna Fortes at afortes@usccr.gov. So at this moment, I will wait and just see if we have any public comment. Okay, so it looks like we do not have any members of the public who are available to offer comment at this time. So I do want to thank all of our speakers. We so appreciate the time that you spent with us today and the really invaluable information that you provided. We will definitely keep in mind your testimony as we are drafting our report, and we appreciate the written materials as well. That really helps us as we go back and think through, what we want to say and recommend in the report. For the committee members, I wanted to remind you that we are going to stay on the line just for a few minutes to debrief the hearing. So speakers, thank you again. You're free to go and get on with your day. I wish you a wonderful day, and I thank you again. And committee members, please stay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I did also want to remind everyone that we have at least one more hearing on this topic. We have chosen Tuesday, May 31st at noon for our third hearing on the topic of access to post-secondary education. And so we may have some information in the chat that the staff will provide about that. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a great day. Anna, are we ready to continue with our committee meeting?
Yes. So you made the first announcement, which is the date that we're rescheduling our next web hearing. That's May 31st from 12 to 2 p.m. But prior to that, I think it's important for us to also meet again to discuss if you would like to narrow down your topic now that we've heard 2 rounds of, we've heard 6 testimonies essentially, and I'm wondering if that's enough information for the committee to narrow down the topic. We do have a planning meeting scheduled in April. It's in late April. It's April 27th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And Cindy, if that's the time that you want to discuss narrowing down the topic, or if you want to just have a quick debrief right now in terms of just what everyone's thinking, just based on what we've heard. And just to also add to that, I do have phone calls set up with a few other stakeholders who may or may not be asked to speak at your third web hearing. I would just like to kind of get some feedback from you all. So let's start with the short debrief, and then I can talk through some of the speakers that you might want to consider inviting to the next web hearing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So for the committee members, one benefit of talking now a little bit about what we want to, if we want to narrow our topic, is that we could have Anna give her a little bit more guidance about speakers for that hearing in May, and give her a little bit more time in terms of finding and securing the kinds of speakers that we want to hear from in May. But there is still time between that April planning meeting and our May hearing. So we don't have to be precise today if we're still kind of mulling things over. I did also want to share, Anna, that one of the speakers I had recommended early on was Christina Castillo, who is the director of the Latinx Resource Center here at SIU. And she was not able to, attend and testify at the hearings, but she did tell me when I saw her this week that she watched our first hearing and is preparing some written testimony, or commentary, I should say, that she plans to submit. So we will have that, her perspective on sort of working with DACA and undocumented students at Southern Illinois University, where she works, and that might help inform us a little bit more on that topic as well. So with that, excuse me, maybe I'll ask the committee, about the highlights from today. If there was something that stood out that really piqued your interest that you thought we ought to focus on or get more information about, this would be a great time for those kinds of insights.
I just want to say that, again, at the risk of sounding repetitive and redundant, these were great speakers, great information, really providing me with a robust understanding of the issue. Well done.
I think one thing that's been highlighted, I think we probably knew that the rates among some of the minority students, Black and Latinx in particular, were lower in terms of, going on for higher education. But the gender difference today was interesting, and it was disappointing, I guess, that there aren't better answers for that. It seemed that the answer was it's complex, right? That there are lots of factors that go into it, but it's not clear how we make recommendations to get at that, to help these young men, particularly the Black and Latin men, where the rates are the lowest. And I don't know if there's someone else that has done any research that we could talk to that could address that more specifically.
Yes, I echo what you're saying, Cindy. If we can find somebody who has done that kind of analytical work, it'd be very helpful. Even with the data on students, male students who have attempted college but then had much higher dropout rates. I'm not sure the school to prison pipeline answer is sufficient at getting at the roots of the problem. So I would appreciate another speaker on that topic.
As someone who works at a four-year university, and we work with a lot of community colleges and try to have students transfer from community colleges to the four-year university, I was also, kind of disappointed to hear how few of those students ultimately succeed. And would be interested, I think, too, in learning more about why that is the case. You know, what's broken in that pathway from high school to community college to four-year university that so many drop out along the way. And I know that our university has had lots of conversations about providing more counseling and support, helping those students make that transition successfully. But you know, I don't know if there's more detailed information available about why that's not more successful. So I see a chat from Jonathan there. Jonathan, maybe you know someone that you could recommend that could provide us with a little bit more data on that topic that might be helpful.
Yes, I will look into that.
That'd be great. Going back to our first speaker as a legal matter, I also found it rather interesting that those clinical type experiences for nurses and other folks in those licensing programs sort of aren't classified either as employment or educational experiences strictly, so that they're perhaps falling in the gap in terms of dealing with potential accommodations for religious needs.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of pretty interesting as well. And maybe the fact that there are some efforts, you know, for advocacy might make it, you know, like a timely issue, because there's some concrete steps being taken in the near future. So so that was pretty notable. And then just to echo what's been said before, the kind of those subtle data of the completion rates, you know, between 2 and 4, and also how dependent it is on, you know, whether a student immediately goes to post-secondary education. Again, I don't have much background in this area, so I don't know, that might be another area for inquiry, and, you know, possible further connections, right, with the access to tech issue and the pandemic that we've kind of touched on earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the gender gap, I'm wondering if it's the vocational prospects that these colleges offer to these men who are dropping out, or that it doesn't have offer. I mean, it would be interesting to see, like for those that stay, for those men that do graduate from college, which majors are they taking? Do they find, is it because men, these boys find that four-year college doesn't offer them a pathway to the vocation that they want to go into? That, you know, that would be helpful too.
You know, the issue of socioeconomic status and the financial barriers, of course, has come up again and again. And I suspected we all knew that before we started. And it's not one of our categories under our authorizing statute. However, it's clearly hugely important to the ability to attend post-secondary education and to complete it. And you know, some of the recommendations that we've heard have been things like, you know, provide more funding for MAP grants, or provide more funding, you know, at colleges for counseling or more funding for courses or various things like that. And certainly we can do that. And that might help those groups that are disproportionately disadvantaged economically. But those are perennial problems, I guess. Is there a group that we haven't heard about, like in, of the different categories of persons and groups in the statute? Is there anything that we really haven't addressed? I guess we have talked about gender, we've talked about religion, we've talked about race and color, disability, national origin. We haven't really heard anything about age, but maybe what Tabassum just brought up, the idea that, or maybe it was Mark, I can't remember, that if you don't go immediately, your chances of being successful are less, those gaps. Or if you take time off, like you start college and then you take time off, and then, maybe you come back, maybe you don't. I suppose that might relate to age. The longer you're out and the more disconnected you feel from the other students who are perhaps younger than you, maybe the harder it is to come back and feel like you're going to fit in and be successful.
Yeah, and then there could be an overlap there too, right, with veteran status.
Mm-hmm. So it was interesting. One thing that I heard was that, remedial courses are not very effective, and they're also not covered by financial aid, and that makes them more expensive for the students. And so, at one point I was wondering if we should be advocating for more support financially and more offerings of remedial courses. But today I was sort of hearing, no, that's not the answer. There are other better answers than supporting remedial courses. All right, Anna, I'm not hearing a whole lot else right now. Maybe we need to reflect on this a little bit more and perhaps come back for our meeting in April to talk further.
Yeah, that would be fine. I just want to share with the committee that I have a few speakers that I have calls lined up with, and some of them I think may be able to speak to some of the gaps, or at least just some voices that you haven't heard from just yet, or some topics that they may touch on that you're looking to hear more about. I have the Director for Student Affairs out of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, who is also a vice chair for the Illinois Committee on Black Concerns in Higher Education. She was actually supposed to speak today, but there was a conflict in her schedule. Her name is Dr. Eugena Lee-Olukoya. I also spoke with Lisa Castillo-Richmond, who is the executive director for the Partnership for College Completion. She might be a good speaker who could offer some recommendations in terms of, some discussion around completion rates. And I believe she has that kind of broken down. That might be helpful as well. They do a little bit more advocacy, so she can kind of talk through some of the strategies that that her organization is using to lobby the state, and Yeah, so that might be helpful. And then I had Andrew Broy, who is who's the president of the Illinois Network for Charter Schools. There was interest in hearing from him, but I would like to hear feedback from you all in terms of whether I should extend that invitation or not. And then lastly, I have Ginger Ostro, who's the executive director for the Illinois Board of Higher Education. I have a call scheduled with her, and she expressed interest in participating. There was interest in when you all had scheduled your first web hearing last year. She was actually supposed to speak. So I just wanted to kind of circle back and see if that's, if you're still interested in hearing from her. So we have 4 speakers. Maybe it would be helpful if I kind of provide some bios for them for you to, determine whether we should move forward with inviting them as speakers at your third web hearing. I'm not sure what do you think, Cindy? Is that a good approach?
I think it could be helpful. Going back to the charter school issue, I guess these are charter schools that are at the high school level? Is that correct?
I don't know exactly. I think so. Because this is network of charter schools. I believe so. Matthew Pabrocki had added Andrew Broy as a potential panelist, and so I had just circled back to see if he was interested in presenting. Yeah, it looks like high schools. Just going on their website now.
So today we heard just a little bit from our first speaker, the rabbi, about laws that pertain to public universities regarding, accommodations and things like that don't necessarily apply to private schools. And one of the things I think he was advocating for was a statute like New Jersey's that would extend some of those protections to persons at private schools. So the charter school could fall into that category, but I'm just not very familiar with charter schools. If we're talking what age level we're talking about, or why Matt would have recommended that. So it would be good to hear from Matt too, what his thinking was, when he suggested the charter school speaker.
Sure. Yeah, well, hopefully he'll be at the meeting on the 27th, on April 27th.
Yeah, and maybe you could even send it out in advance and ask anyone who cannot be there to comment by email, or to give their feedback in advance too.
Sure.
All right, committee members, is there anything else today? Anything you want to respond to based on what you heard Anna say? The teacher in me has to count and wait a few seconds before I go on. Hearing nothing, I will just thank all the committee members for being here today. I know sometimes it's hard to sit in your chair for 2 hours without a break, but I appreciate all of you. You asked some great questions, and I thought we had a really informative hearing today. So thank you very much. And thank you to Anna and Liliana for all your support. You've been great putting these hearings together. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.
Cindy, can you stay on for a minute?
Sure.